I've been warned that this is a complicated issue. The relationship with the American Samoan people in the community is not without its complexity. It bothers me, it worries me that we have used our public safety resources in this way to try and accomplish some sort of goal of undermining our trust in our election system. And I really am grateful that we'll continue working on this because I think as quickly as possible, we need to debunk that there's some sort of nefarious election fraud going. There's no election fraud here. There are some election registration processes that really weren't very friendly for some folks that were in a very nebulous situation.
Welcome to the East Anchorage Book Club. I'm your host, Andrew Gray. The purpose of this podcast is to tell the stories of Alaskans of interest and importance. Today, our guest is Alaska State House Representative for South Anchorage, Girdwood Whittier Ky Holland. Ky was born and raised in Anchorage, the son of a federal judge, Russ Holland, who was the judge in the case against Exxon after Exxon Valdez Oil spill. Ky left Alaska for college and stayed away for over a decade. Returning in the late 90s, he continued his work as a mechanical engineer, then expanded into academia and eventually into entrepreneurship. It was lack of investment and growth in the private sector, particularly our small businesses, that has motivated his legislation during his freshman session in Juneau. But it was a fear that we wouldn't properly fund our schools that motivated him to run for office in the first place. We talk about all of that, and as you heard in the intro, the case against 10 American Samoans in Ky Holland's district who have been charged with voter misconduct. Ky Holland, welcome to the podcast.
Thank you. It's a pleasure to be here.
I want to start off by talking about your name, because Ky is a nickname for Hezekiah.
It is, yeah. My first name is Hezekiah, and it's an old family name. It's been around for, I don't know, it depends on how you want to count it, a couple hundred years. The first boy gets to be Hezekiah. So
your dad was Hezekiah.
My dad is Hezekiah, and my grandfather's Hezekiah, and my son is Hezekiah, and my great-great-grandfather. And most of us also have the same middle name.
Russell?
Russell, with one L.
Interesting. And your son goes by Russell.
He does. And so one of the things that we've done to keep track of ourselves is that we bounce around on each person has a different piece of the name. So I've gone by Ky, my son goes by Russell, my dad has gone by Russ, and so on. So that way we know who we're talking about.
It seems like a biblical name.
It is. Hezekiah was a king in Judea.
So you said Hezekiah goes back 200 years.
In our family,
yeah. Is that still in the New World? Or does it go back to the Old World?
Actually, that's still New World then. We've got some good history on the family. There was a Gabriel that came over in around 1625 on the good ship Supply from England. He came over with what we believe to be his first wife in 1625 into Jamestown. So this is after Jamestown had been founded. So it was not the earliest part of the Jamestown struggles. And then it appears he went back in 1632 about. It looks like maybe his first wife had died and came back with a second wife. And from there, the Hollands began to come forth from that. There was also an uncle that came over with him at that point. So we can generally trace the Hollands in this country to generally two branches. There's the Gabriel branch that I come from, and there's I think it's a John branch that is more the Georgia, Texas group of folks. That has been fun to have that genealogy there. But, we go back quite a few years, and then I don't know much about the history back into England beyond that.
And you were born and raised in Anchorage.
So I was born in the Benihana restaurant.
Oh, yeah. Like many other folks who were serving this building.
Exactly. Yeah. I had fun during the campaign. I would use that line. And I'd say, born in Anchorage in the Benihana. And about half the people would get the joke, and the other half would look at me like, what are you talking about?
How did your family get to Alaska?
Sure. My parents came up to Alaska in around 1960. My dad had just finished law school, and he got a job up here.
Working for Nesbitt.
Yeah, he had an early job, and then it went into private practice shortly after, a couple of years after that.
Went into private practice with Ted Stevens.
They did?
Before Ted Stevens became Senator Ted Stevens.
Yeah, they had a practice together. Ted Stevens ran for the Senate in, 68, I think?
No, unfortunately, I know this history all too well. Bob Bartlett died, and Ted Stevens was appointed. Ted Stevens ran the first time for real in 1970.
Was that the first one? Because I was trying to recall if he ran and then got appointed or got appointed and then ran. But I remember.
Oh, I think he did ran and lost.
Oh, that's what I was referring to. That.
Yes.
Yeah, because
he ran and lost.
Yeah. And then he got appointed. Yeah.
Yes. And then he got appointed.
Because I remember all the Ted Stevens for Senate signs. Because back in the day, the cars had the rain gutters on there. And we used to put campaign signs on top of cars. They'd be a big plywood sign and they'd be strapped on the rain gutters.
What year were you born?
62.
So you were very young.
Oh, yeah. Yeah.
But you remember.
Yeah.
So you were here in the big earthquake.
I was. Yeah.
But you were too.
Yeah. That I don't remember. I just know that anytime there's an earthquake, my heart and my adrenaline goes off the chart because there's something deep in my reptilian brain that I think still remembers that. I was not a happy camper, according to my mom.
And you grew up on the hillside?
Most of it. We started off in Mountain View.
Okay.
So
you were in Mountain View for the earthquake?
Yes. Yeah. We lived down at the end of Price Street and we were there until 67, I think, 67, 68. And then we moved up to the hillside and we were up on the hillside since then.
So your dad went to work in private practice in the same firm of Ted Stevens and he was appointed to be a federal judge by Ronald Reagan.
That's right, in 84.
And it was confirmed by the U.S. Senate. I guess you were grown.
Yeah, I was in college at that point because I graduated from service in 79, go Cougars, and took a year off, lost some brain cells, and then finally decided that college was maybe a better path. And so I started school in the fall of 80. And so I was in school when he started with the appointment.
Was that an exciting time in your family? Was it a big deal?
I think it was a big deal. At that point, we were all scattering at that point.
Where did you go to college?
Oregon State, Corvallis, Oregon. I was studying engineering down there. And so we were already going in different directions. But yeah, it was an important, big deal at that point.
And your mom was?
My mom was a mom for quite a while. And then she went back and continued her art work. She was teaching at the Anchorage Community College back in the 70s.
The UAA before.
Exactly.
Before it was UAA.
Yeah. And I think she had maybe done an art degree there and then was teaching and part of the old Visual Arts Center that was got the art scene for Anchorage back in the 70s. And she was involved with that, involved with being a mom. She was also involved in some of the unification work between the city and the borough. It was happening in the 70s. And then she took off to work on her MFA sometime in maybe 77 or 78 and headed off to Madison. So was gone for quite a while, the later part of my high school at that point. And she's been an artist all her life and has been involved in a variety of different media over time.
So your mom went to Madison, Wisconsin while you were still in high school. And so I guess it was like a single family home while she was in Wisconsin.
Yeah, for practical purposes. My dad was working quite a bit at that point in time. And the three of us kids were pretty self-sufficient in terms of getting ourselves to school.
And you're the oldest?
Yeah. Yeah, my brother is about a year and a half younger, and my sister's another year and a half younger than him. So we're relatively close together.
You said you took a year off and killed some brain cells. Did you have a wild year?
It was pretty wild. I was done with school by the time I was halfway through my senior year. I was not going to school much. I did pretty well in school. If I showed up, I could take a test and pass the test, but sticking around doing homework, I was done by mid-year. And so I was heading down to a job that I had at the Diamond Center and out playing around with my friends and barely graduated, didn't have very good grades at that point in time. And I had a chance to work a couple jobs. I was mainly pumping gas and doing auto repair mechanics. So I was rebuilding cars at that point, painting cars, and took that year and was not ready for any sort of school and would get up in the middle of the day and go work a shift at the gas station and then go over to Eddie's Hayloft and close Eddie's Hayloft at 2 or 3 in the morning whenever they closed, and then rinse and repeat back to work the next day. So I did that for about 6 months before I realized that was not the life I wanted to live down the road, but for a while it was fun.
Did your parents intervene in any way, or did they care?
It's hard to say at that point. I'm not sure that I was paying that much attention. That would be unfair for me to characterize what they thought about it because I was just doing my own thing.
But you don't recall them expressing disapproval or disappointment in any way? That when you were getting the bad grades at the end and It just seems like with a lawyer and our teacher mom, like that there would be some expectation that you would do well in school or go to college.
What I do recall was that there was an expectation I was going to college. So when I announced I was not going to college right after high school, that I remember being an issue and a disappointment at that point. So that does stand out. That was a concern and disappointment.
Do you think that taking that year off and allowing yourself to just party basically meant that when you did get to college that you were more invested?
Oh, I definitely see that. It was night and day. About halfway through that gap year, which would be the polite way of saying, what I did, I knew that I was not on a good path at that point. I knew that going to school and being able to study the engineering and the work that I really enjoyed, because I was really good with mechanical-ish things, I knew that's what I wanted to be doing. And so when I went to school, I was there because I knew I wanted to be there and what I wanted to do. And I saw tremendous difference in terms of my focus and my desire to be there for learning, as opposed to many of the other kids that were showing up from school were for the first time getting a chance to have some additional freedom. And I think it also was serendipitous that because I had been out of school for a year, I wasn't required to live in the dorms. And so I immediately was off campus and pretty quickly had become fairly independent.
Did you know you wanted to do electrical engineering?
Oh, I was mechanical
engineering.
Yeah.
Mechanical engineering.
Yeah.
And you knew you wanted to do mechanical engineering?
Yeah, I was pretty clear on that because of just the aptitude and the interest I had in motors and engines and stuff like that. I just enjoyed the topic. Everything about it was fun for me. I had wanted to get into MIT. They wouldn't have me, and Harvey Mudd wouldn't have me, and Washington wouldn't have me, and Oregon took me. The crappy high school grades
held you back.
It really hurt me at that point. In the end, where I went to Oregon State, the education, the people I met, and then the pathway then to the jobs and whatnot, I would not change a thing in terms of how that worked out.
So what'd you do right after college?
My original plan was to be back in Alaska. I had maxed out on the state student loan program, which you may know then was a pretty generous program where you could get half of whatever you borrowed from it forgiven if you came back. And so I borrowed to the max. Cheap money. I was coming back and it made sense. I graduated in the spring of '85 when the economy in Alaska was in the toilet. There was no jobs for a young engineer up here, and I didn't want to be scrape paint off a boat or something like that. So I had found a job offer in Portland, and my now wife, Sharon, who I also grew up with in Anchorage, but we ended up independently in Oregon. That's a different story. So I wanted to be at Portland. Like that's where Sharon was at.
So you knew Sharon from Anchorage, elementary school.
Yeah, we met each other in third grade. So we knew each other all the way through school. Uh-huh. And I was always interested in Sharon. And we're friends and got together, but she never wanted anything more than friends. And I was always interested more, but I never got to first base in terms of anything during high school. But it was a couple of years, probably 3 years into college when you reconnected, that Sharon had found out I was down there, sent me a Christmas card and said I'm down there. And we started seeing each other and started dating at that point in time. So I was applying for jobs in the Portland area, and I'd stayed on for an extra couple semesters digging pretty deeply into robotics and automated control systems, and was really looking forward to getting involved in some sort of automation, and actually had a job offer from Hyster Corporation in their R&D facility in Portland, designing automated trucks for material handling. So it's fascinating to think 30 plus years ago, there was already automated vehicles being designed. At any rate, a month before I was going to start, they sent me a letter and said, we're in a hiring freeze and we have to rescind our job offer, but our parent company has some engineering jobs open. Are you interested in Portland? And I said, yeah, I'm looking for an engineering job. Portland's where I want to be. And so it turned out to be a job designing teeth for digging dirt on buckets. And I thought I had really gone the wrong way in life, because that was not automated robotic control system designing hunks of steel to dig dirt out of the ground. But I took the job, and it turned into what has been now a 40-year career in the mining and construction industry. It was a great job. It's a great company. I've been working with them in different ways up until last year. And it taught me pretty quickly that it's not what you do, it's who you do it with and how you do it.
The people.
It's the people and just how you take on the challenges and the opportunities that are there that make the difference.
You said you started off designing teeth for these digging mechanism.
Yeah, if you look at a bucket digging dirt, there's
Right.
little teeth, little
Yeah.
bits of.
But I assume you didn't do that for 40 years. So what are the different roles you've had at the company?
Yeah, so I moved through the company. I started off literally designing teeth to dig dirt and the locks. And turns out there's a pretty sophisticated technology around those wear parts. Ground engaging tools are called GET. The technology around the design of those, the materials that are used, the ability of those pieces of steel that are out at the end of the bucket to not break, turns out to be a really interesting metallurgical challenge and design challenge. At any rate, I moved up through the engineering ranks initially of doing the engineering myself and then managing the engineers and being project engineer. And then I moved laterally over into a marketing position so I could get out and travel a lot more. I did global mining market work. So I was all over the place in gold mines in particular and some copper mines. And then as our kids started coming along, I took a transfer to run one of the business units in San Diego and ran a business unit down there. In 98, that would be the 100th centennial of the Klondike Gold Rush up here. I grew up absolutely in love with the Klondike Gold Rush. Anything Gold Rush was cool. I read all the Jack London stories and whatnot. And so the 1998 was the 100th centennial. So we came up here and did Klondike, the Chilkoot hike, and went up to Dawson, did the whole thing, and decided it was finally time to come back to Alaska. And at that point, we had 2 kids. Our younger son, Russell, was, I think, a year old for that. And so we jumped off the corporate ladder at that point.
And I guess your dad was the judge for the Exxon Valdez spill, the litigation against Exxon.
Yeah.
And it's just a question, how closely did you track your dad's career?
I hope that it's fair to say I was aware of it and following it, but keep in mind at that point, I was busy in a life and a family at that point.
And so 98 was the Klondike Gold Rush centennial, and you guys moved back to Alaska the next year.
Yeah, that's when we made the decision that we were finally ready to come back. So we moved back in 99.
And was Sharon on board if she wanted to come back too?
Yeah, right. And her parents were here. They're both passed now. But we always knew we wanted to get back to Alaska. It was just a question of when the situation. We basically just packed up and moved up here in the summer of 99.
What did you do? You kept working for the same company, but from Anchorage?
Yeah, it becomes a patchwork at that point. The work that I did for the company in the years since then, so I think that's almost 25 years now, has been a patchwork series of different consulting projects along the way.
So I'm going to go out on a limb and say that a mechanical engineer who took a job with a mining company and stayed with them, that not every mechanical engineer who follows that path would also become involved in entrepreneurship and basically helping startups.
Yeah.
Is that something you were always interested in, or?
No, there's a big gap in there to fill out that part of the story, because the first piece of that whole puzzle, I think, is to pick up on all the community organizing that I was doing in Portland. So I spent 10 years and got deeply involved in the community organizations, from housing to crime prevention to land use planning. And I truly enjoyed that kind of work, but I enjoyed it from the process standpoint. When I came back up to Anchorage in 99, I spent the first year finishing out some projects for the same company at that point. But then I picked up a job at UAA, and for the next 3 years, I was managing the Applied Technologies Division, which was a group of about 11 different technical-related degree programs. And the work there led me into getting involved with Alaska Process Industry Careers Consortium, which was an industry-led workforce development partnership with the university. And I became chair of the board of that and then took over as the executive director of that. So I ran that organization, including the North Slope Training Cooperative and all the safety training for the oil companies on the North Slope. But someplace in there, I got invited to go to work and help run the Envision product design business, which was manufacturing industrial digital X-ray equipment. And that involved equipment for the North Slope pipe inspection work. But we also had gotten into doing some fun projects like the Lockheed Martin, the space shuttle, when it crashed, and from the heat shields in there, built the system that would do the 3D inspection of the heat shields for the space shuttles. We built products for Johnson & Johnson, surgical needles for them. We built X-ray inspection systems for Ford and some of their products. So a bunch of really interesting projects. But jumping ahead past all the minutia there, we had one of our products, a video x-ray system, that became really popular. And we started selling those around the world. And the business was purchased by one of our dealer. And when I left, that's when I got sucked up into the entrepreneurial ecosystem. When we sold the x-ray business, I'd been teaching as an adjunct since 2000. I've already been doing that for a long time, teaching classes on and off over time. And so when we sold the x-ray business and the new folks wanted to move to Houston, and I didn't want to go to Houston at all, I got asked by the folks at APU, where the adjunct at APU, they said, will you teach a class this fall again? And I said, I really don't know if I want to teach a class this fall. Just finally close down, shift off the business is all done. I'm looking forward to taking a break at this point. And they said, gosh, if you're no longer working and you want to take a break, why don't you come to work for us full time? And that was it was a surprising option because I wasn't looking for it at all. So I finally decided that, yes, I would do that with the idea that this would be a 1 year, 9-month stint that would give me the time to teach some classes, which I'd already been teaching anyway.
So what year was that? Around?
That was 2013.
Okay.
So I started in July, and then in August, suddenly the guy, Scott Frederickson, I think, he normally taught entrepreneurship, and all of a sudden he had a family problem and he had to leave. And so the folks there in the department said, Ky, we need someone to teach entrepreneurship. And so they said, will you do it? Okay. It wasn't like I had an academic entrepreneurial background. I'd just been running businesses and knew a lot about business. I took over the class, not really knowing what was going on, but decided I could do this. And then Ross Johnston, who, in the Anchorage community, he gets a hold of me and wants me to get involved with their Leadership Anchorage cohort because he knows Startup Weekends. And he wants me to be the community connection for sustainability of their project.
And was Startup Weekends always kind of like a Shark Tank experience? Yeah,
the program hasn't.
So it was like Shark Tank before Shark Tank, really.
Yes, with the difference that Shark Tank is very much an investor-based type of activity, and Startup Weekends are very much about business models and about getting started. You're very pre-investment.
Well, I guess for listeners, can you explain what the Startup Weekend is and how it works?
Yeah, Startup Weekend is a 54-hour sprint to help somebody learn the basic steps of going from an idea to building a business model to testing it out on customers to building a pitch presentation to it. And at the end of the weekend, you're actually pitching in front of a set of judges. It's intended to go from Friday night to Sunday night, and it's the best program I've ever found for helping people get a very quick, fast, experiential opportunity to learn how to actually take an idea and turn it into something. And I like to promote it with people from the standpoint, it's not just about starting a business, but it's about sprinting through the process of taking any idea, whether you work for an existing company and you want to take an idea that you have and try and turn it into something to go pitch to the current business owners, or whether you're trying to do some sort of social project. But most of the folks that go through it are doing it as a way to learn about this entrepreneurship type of idea. And we've had a number of successes with people going through that. The shoes I'm wearing from Pandera Shoes, that's Laura Oden, went through one of the first Startup Weekends, and she met a couple of folks at a weekend and turned it into a shoe business that is going on to this day. And
what I thought was interesting, because I attended the Sunday night pitch. I remember saying that I liked a particular group's pitch, and I think you told me that's interesting because that is absolutely not what they started on Friday night with. In this case, somebody came in with a particular idea and left with a completely different idea. So really, it's almost like you want to start a business. We're going to help you start a business. Figure out how to start a business. And you may not even know what business you're going to start.
And the weekends really, in most cases, are not going to be one where you come in with your idea and leave with it. That's the real intent of the weekend, is for a group of strangers to meet up and to actually perhaps listen to other people's ideas. And then there'll be one that they will associate with and form a team around. But it's always the case that people are going to end up going a different direction than they planned. And that's part of what people are getting out of this experience, is that mental flexibility to realize that any idea you come up with is going to end up pivoting and changing over time. But we specifically in Startup Weekends, don't let people come in and work on an idea that they've already developed. So they can have an idea in their head, something they're interested in, and they can, at the beginning on Friday, they can pitch this thing they're interested in and say, hey, I'm looking for a team of folks that wants to work on this problem and maybe this kind of solution. But then they've got to listen to everybody else pitch, and we only pick 6 or 7 of the pitched ideas. And if your idea that you pitched isn't
selected,
then you're gonna have to find somebody to work with.
That's so interesting. I didn't understand that part of it.
Yeah, so it's not very often that people's initial idea that they pitched is the idea that they end up working on to begin with. But then the second step is invariably what we're teaching them is how to go out and do some customer validation and customer discovery in order to figure out what might work. And invariably they figure out that they need to see the problem differently or the pathway to a solution differently. What would you say to the question of what's the percentage of job creation in our community in Alaska over 10 years that comes from startups, businesses that are less than 5 years old? What do you think that percentage is of net new job creation? High, low?
Net new job creation.
Yeah. What's creating new jobs in Alaska?
Well, I would assume it was small businesses because the reason why is because I feel like the key word is new. We have a ton of existing jobs that have been there for a long time from these established companies.
But they disappear over time too. How many jobs are in Alaska and BP right now?
I'm the worst person to ask because I've done all my work basically for the federal government.
Yeah, gotcha. So you think it's high or low?
I think it's high.
89%. 89% of net new job creation in Alaska over 10 years comes from businesses less than 5 years old. What do you think it is nationally? Higher or lower than that?
Lower.
Higher. 100% of net new job creation in this country, 100% comes from new scalable startups. The Amazons, the Alphabets.
But those are
Teslas.
like unicorns. So my understanding is that the vast majority of new startup businesses fail.
They do. Nine out of 10 basically fail, but the 10th, they're what becomes someday the Fords, the GEs, the IBMs.
That just seems like terrible odds. For somebody who's not involved in entrepreneurship, being told that you have a 90% chance of failure makes me think I'll look somewhere else. I'm not going to venture into almost certain failure.
So how many of your bills have been successful?
2.
Out of how many have you introduced?
I've introduced 20, so I guess it's about the same. But I'm about, knock on wood, 3 more.
It's surprising that when we start looking into this issue of success on ideas, we start ideas and throw them away all the time in this world. And it was funny to me to watch during the pandemic. I was trying to get some money for...
Can I just interrupt though?
Yeah.
I have a problem with that analogy because there are legislators who've served here for a decade who haven't gotten any bills through. But you know what they have gotten? A paycheck every 2 weeks. So the difference is that when you're doing a business, there's a chance that you may not get a paycheck. And if you have a family, a mortgage to pay, there's real risks to that in a way that you don't have. Like, yeah, I could file a ton of bills and have none of them pass, but it's not going to impact my family's ability to survive.
Right. I was making a slightly different analogy that trying out new ideas and thinking that there's risk and that 1 out of 10 is only successful. It turns out that happens in a lot of things. Most established companies in their new product development cycles throw away 9 out of 10 of their ideas. Most of us, when we make job applications, we don't get 9 out of 10. It's the riskiness of entrepreneurship is really no different than the riskiness of anything. And what you're touching on is a really valuable aspect of this, because I run into that same concern on policymakers, which is when I talk about entrepreneurship and investing in innovation and new startups, their first response is, this sounds like this is really risky. This is a waste of time and money. And of course, I won't spend too much time on how much money we spent on fish plants or barley mills or many other social things we spend hundreds of millions and billions of dollars on, as if somehow that's not risky. And I would say, give me $100,000 for your $100 million, and I can guarantee you I'll do more No, the interesting part about the startup ecosystem work is that, yes, 9 out of 10 are likely to fail, but the 10th one is going to make up for all the other nine, which is why angel investors always invest in these businesses, because they know it's proven that the ecosystem will pay off. Because angel investors wouldn't invest if they were going to lose money 9 out of 10 and not make enough money on the 10th. They make enough money on the 10th one that pays for all the rest. Those of us that get into startups know that our first idea may not work. Our second one has got a better chance, and the third one is probably going to do pretty well. So the issue with startups and the startup ecosystem is not one idea, one chance of success, and a 90% chance of failure. The ecosystem is about creating this engine where you're cycling through these ideas, and 9 out of 10 may not work, which is why the startup weekend is so valuable, because you've already helped somebody get through one of those. And invariably with our startup weekends, we'll have 8 or 9 teams in a startup weekend. And invariably we get one of those that turns into a real business. Pandera Shoes has been going on for almost 10 years now. 60 Hertz has been going on, raising millions of dollars for about 8 years at this point. The one you were at, Remote Hands, is off hiring people in remote Alaska.
Yeah, no, that was a cool one.
Yeah.
But here's the thing, and this is a question about that. And I think, as I remember, Remote Hands was basically a company that would have folks in remote villages who could be hired to go check on equipment in remote places. So rather than paying to fly somebody from Anchorage to a small, tiny village at an enormous expense, they would just pay somebody on the ground to go take a look and come back.
Yeah.
That I didn't know that they won. They won. Yeah. So
They not only won, but they went on to continue their business.
And this was the thing that I wondered at the time, is that sometimes the most interesting and fun pitches, when you sat back and thought about it, was like, I don't know if that's going to really work though.
Yeah. And most startup businesses don't ever work the way you start off thinking that they're going to work. And the first pitch is only the first pitch.
I'm glad that the business with the greatest chance of success won.
Yeah. Although I would also note, though, that from my standpoint, I don't look at these events as winners per se. I don't look at startups in terms of winners and losers, because invariably you don't know which one of them is actually going to be successful in there. And in the case even of, say, an angel conference, where at the end of it, we write a check for $100,000 to somebody, I bristle at even our own ecosystem folks that will talk about who won this is not a winner prize type of stuff. Somebody earned an investment, and they are going to have to work their ass off because they've got this investment. But the other companies that maybe didn't get that investment probably met 2 or 3 other investors, and they're going to end up getting an investment anyway. So there isn't this winning kind of thing in here. There's the experience, there's the connections, there's the value being created. But winners, as if this is a fun prize and we're doing this for entertainment, I bristle.
So why did you run for office?
It was not my plan. I spent the last 4 years working on an organization called Alaska Version 3, which came out of my search during the pandemic for an answer to the question of why is innovation hard and why is Alaska stuck? They're an intersecting set of problems. And I posted a video in 2020. And I asked the question, what's next, Alaska? What's next? Anybody got a plan? Anybody see what's next for our state is keeping our pipeline 25% full? Is that success for our state? Our kids going to be happy and generations are going to be here because the pipeline still has 25% of its volume still flowing through there? I said, anybody got a plan on what's next? I asked that question in that video. It was a little 3-minute long video saying, anybody got a plan? Anybody know what's next for our state? And I got a bunch of people that reached out to that and said, yeah, you're right. We don't have a plan for what's next. We don't know what's beyond our stagnation and where we're at right now. And so folks wanted to get together. We started meeting every Friday, 10 a.m. for 2 years. Folks kept showing up to dig into different aspects of what is next. Is there a next future for our state? And that turned into, then folks wanted to do a 501c3 to create a nonprofit to do this with the idea of expanding this message, this question, and to help wake up people to the idea of what would be our next economic era for this state. If it's not a bunch of resource development, if we're We're going to keep it going, but there's no boom left. A lot of people and myself agree that resource development will be an important part of our economy, but it's not going to be a big growth part. If we'll get a new oil field here, another one will run out, a new mine there, another one will close down. It'll stay even. And so I've been working on that work, and I spent the last couple of years involved in projects related to economic development with a lens on innovation. And I got really interested in the question of, do we have some sort of pathway for a vision and an investment in a future Alaska economy? So I was doing all that work, and the seat for House District 9 turned out was going to be open with
Matty Shaw
exactly not running. Although for a long time we didn't know. He was very circumspect about whether or not he was going to run or not. But anyway, it became clear he wasn't going to run. And in January, I'd met Lee Ellis, one of the other people that became a candidate, and he and I got along really well. And I was comfortable with him running until middle of February, and we were at a Rapid Creek Community Council meeting. It was online, it was a Zoom meeting. And he was on the meeting as a candidate for the seat and announced that he was running as a Republican. And myself and a number of others were shocked. That was not what we understood. We understood that he was running as an independent. And I still remember the chat that was going, the Zoom chat in there. A bunch of us were going, what the heck? Oh my goodness.
Had he always been registered as a Republican, or did he register to run?
It's a little vague at some point, and I'm not sure it's worth my digging into, but at some point it was understood that he was thinking about, or he was talking about running as an independent the year before. So a lot of people
assumed he was going to run
that he was still running as an independent. It appears, from what I can tell, that when he actually filed, he filed as a Republican. But everybody was still assuming that he was running as an independent at that point. And it's the same night that Dunleavy vetoes SB 140. And then the following, Monday or Tuesday, when there's the veto override.
And SB 140 was the education funding bill last year.
Exactly, the BSA funding bill. And so then the next week, the legislature, including Shaw, reverses his vote, won't overturn the veto.
Refused to override.
And that's when I decided that this wasn't going to work for me to support.
So you were afraid that because he was running as a Republican, he would vote similarly to Matty Shaw.
Yeah, I was absolutely adamant that we needed to change direction on spending for education. It was too important. And so that got me looking at the race at that point.
I'll just state for the record, though, that we did have Republicans who voted for SB 140 and to override.
They're there, but that caused me to have grave concern about whether or not we had a candidate that I knew would do that. And at that point, it was not clear where it would go. But I decided really, after some reflection the first couple of weeks after that, about whether or not I was going to run, that I really did not want to run as a not an R candidate.
Let's talk about that really fast, because your dad was appointed by Ronald Reagan. I don't know, was your family Republican?
Generally, yeah.
Yeah. Had you grown up with a political affiliation? Did you feel like you had a political affiliation?
I started off feeling like I was a Republican, because that was generally the bias. Ted Stevens was a Republican, and we grew up kind of Republican-ish. But I wouldn't say I was terribly active in that, although at some point I remember being involved in a Don Young Republican thing and part of a campaign at some point. And I was a Ted Stevens intern in Washington when I was in high school. So I was in that circle. It was not political at that point. But I would say that my time in Portland definitely dragged me off into the progressive side of the
That's
world.
Interesting, looking at it through the lens of the problems that are publicized in Portland today, that I could see how somebody with more of a conservative bent would actually be maybe turned off by some of the more progressive politics in Portland. I guess blaming some of the problems in Portland with their homelessness situation on the progressive policies.
Yeah. Keep in mind, though, that my time in Portland is from mid-'80s to mid-'90s.
So it's different place.
A very different place. This is the world of Bud Clark, who was mayor, and then Vera Katz at that point. And this was a point when Portland was known and celebrated for its community involvement, for its progressive liberal policies. It was not a town of homelessness and social related ills at that point. It was a town that was successful, and it was trying to figure out how is it going to manage its growing success. It was creating a progressive policy around having urban growth boundary. That was really a progressive, hard policy for those that would be more conservative, say, let growth happen. And they were saying, no, smart growth is, we got to constrain it. So there was a very progressive place, but it was very steeped in the ethos of community engagement, which, zooming back up to why did I get involved in entrepreneurship and why did I enjoy it so much, is because it's another manifestation of the same opportunity to help people create the future they want for themselves. So to me, entrepreneurship is just another flavor of what I was doing back in the 80s, helping people figure out how to clean up a neighborhood or deal with a crime-related issue in the neighborhood or come up with a neighborhood plan and build a park. They were trying to create the future they wanted in their community. Entrepreneurship is just simply about working with people who are trying to create the future they want for themselves or some future they want to build because of a passion for a problem or idea they want to have. And I've always found that kind of work interesting, and is what's motivated me ultimately to get into the politics, because while I got clear pretty quickly that I didn't want to run as not an R, I did get clarity that I really wanted to lean into this. How do we create the environment where we can be creating the next Alaska that we want for ourselves, recognizing we've been stuck for 15 years in this stagnant economic era where our population was going down, our gross domestic product, our economic output was flat. And it was amazing to me. Just last week, there was a Commonwealth North meeting, and they were celebrating that we're finally back to where we were in 2015. And if you read the end of the report, the recommendations are, how are we going to stabilize where we're at? It's kind of like, shit, is that our measure of success? That once again, staying 25% full, staying where we were in 2015, that's success. That's not going to keep our families here. And I got motivated around the question of how can we help wake ourselves up to what I think is an amazing array of opportunities in this state, whether it's in energy, Arctic development, or outdoor tourism, recreation, blue technology in our oceans at this point. This is just an amazing place we live. We should be a place full of people excited to be here and creating new businesses, new opportunities. And so I'm trying to wake up people. I went and tallied up all the bills that we've introduced in this session at this point. It's, of course, over 200. I don't know what the exact number, 220 or whatnot. You know how many of those bills talk about economic development in terms of actually growing our economy?
Two. Yours?
Yes. 2 out of the whole friggin' thing. What else? We cannot build a state that satisfies our need for housing and paying for roads and paying for health if we're not building some new businesses and new opportunities for people to stay here.
Just because something isn't mentioned explicitly in a bill doesn't mean that bill wouldn't provide opportunity or help in some way.
No, I'm being a little over the top.
Well, but I want to talk about it. What has your experience been like? Because I know that when you came in, you were vocal about wanting to accomplish things right away, like having a accelerated timeline to get more done faster.
Right.
And coming in with that attitude, how do you feel today?
I feel good about the experience I've gotten here. One of the things that is really central to my mental outlook on what I'm doing and my attitude about this is that I've been helping work on a book last springtime, about the same time this decision process about will I run or not. I've been asked all my life to run. This is not the first time there was an opportunity. I've always said, this is not my tribe, not my thing. I've just always just kept my head down. I've just worked hard. I do projects. I love working in the community. I love working in business. I just always believed my best role was just to get stuff done, not go into the, and so this is really unusual that I decided, because I've never run before. I never wanted to run before or anything else like that. But I was working on a book, and there was a section in there that I was helping edit. And there's a phrase that people are pretty familiar with. It says, if you're not part of the solution, you're part of the problem. There's another version of that same expression that says, if you're not part of the problem, you can't be part of the solution. And it was when I was working on that section, and I was working on the question of, was I going to run? Why am I running? If I want to be working on this next Alaska, is this really the way to do it? Or should I just keep doing the nonprofit work and the projects? I've got a full year of projects I wanted to be doing. I was not looking for something to do. I was busy. And it was when I realized that coming here and becoming part of this place was the best way that I could try and learn enough about it to be able to maybe help be part of the solution down the road. I don't know. The jury for me is still out, that I made a choice of which way I thought I could have a greater impact long term. And I'm going down this path, learning, and I'm glad I'm here and I'm learning a lot. But I'm still not convinced that just simply keeping my head down and getting to work won't be a trade-off or an opportunity cost there. I don't know.
So you have a bill to create an entrepreneurship task force.
The Innovation Council.
Innovation
There's
Council.
two, the Innovation Council and an Office of Entrepreneurship. So I think you're talking about
I'm probably
Innovation
pushing
Council.
them all together.
Yeah, that's okay.
But I guess as somebody who was not really involved in politics and now has had 3 years in this building, the frustrating thing for me is that we had this fiscal policy working group from a few years ago. They created a report. We've implemented none of it. The governor is now calling for another fiscal policy working group. To me, the idea of creating a task force or some sort of board, it's absolutely colored by my experience in this building that we don't need any more boards making recommendations. We need to be doing things, not talking about doing things. And so I think, I'm just being really honest with you, I have some prejudice, I think, against both bills, because I just don't have a lot of faith that using the legislature as a model, that us talking about things results in action.
Mm-hmm.
And so I've been ambivalent, to say the least.
Right.
I don't know. Do you have a response?
I appreciate you bringing that up. And I think your observation, your concerns are spot on and exactly correct. I have the same about these two bills. I don't think that these two bills are the best way to spark a mindset of growth and an opportunity narrative about creating a place that our families are going to be excited to stay, where our kids in school are motivated by what they're going to get to do after school. These two bills have been, for me, a way to say, given where we're at, we need to have some way to have a better conversation about the fact that we are not talking about our future. We are managing our decline. You've maybe heard me use that phrase before. We are having a conversation about how are we going to manage the decline of our school district? Which schools do we want to close next? Our population's in decline. Our families aren't sticking around. We don't have as many kids in our school. So we're talking about the responsible way to manage the decline of our school district. And we're doing that across our state at this point. We're trying to decide which roads we're going to be able to plow at this point, which projects can't we do, which healthcare systems do we want to cut, which departments do we want to cut. I am tired of a mindset of managing the decline of our state. When are we going to start talking about building some sort of future for this? So these two bills for me were a way to articulate a macroeconomic question of, can we create an innovation mindset and look at distinctive opportunities for our state and look at the state's comprehensive economic development strategy, which is a perfect example of your concern that we come up with a good plan and it sits there and gets dusty.
Right.
We do, and they do. And this Innovation Council's focus is to bring together, convene folks, get them in the same room, and talk about the fact that we are not working on the economic development opportunities that we could around innovation. And the Entrepreneurship Office is an office to look at the microeconomic impact of how do we help individual firms become successful. And I wish there was a better way to stimulate this. That's the work I was doing in the nonprofit, because this to me is not the ideal way. There's 4 basic ways economies accelerate their growth. One is the university leads it. One is you have industry clusters that lead it. One is you have some sort of community initiatives that lead it. And the fourth is you have some sort of state governmental run effort to lead it. Those are the 4 ways it gets done globally over long-term tracking this kind of stuff and studying it and whatnot. Alaska's university is not leading its economic development. I wish it was. It should be, but it's a workforce. Turns out good graduates. I'll give them that. Does some research, but it is not an economic engine for us. Our industry clusters are not doing research in this state. They're extracting stuff out of there and doing a nice job at it, creating a lot of good jobs, but they're not creating an innovation ecosystem in there. Our community organizations are taking care of business as usual, but our arters and our economic development organizations, they're just keeping members happy.
They're proud that we're back to 2015.
Exactly. And Anchorage has got a great Choose Anchorage plan. Please read it. It's a wonderful plan. There's no investment in it. It sits there and it jiggles and whatnot. So we got those 4 options. 3 of them are MIA. So here I am in the legislature. And so I'm going to put forth a way to bring in that 4th option, the state doing it.
That was very helpful.
So that's my intent. I don't think it's long-term, the best way to do it, but we need some sort of catalyst to have a conversation. And it's part of why also you didn't see me pushing that bill super hard. Having 2 more staffers in the DCCED, is that going to change anything? No, I'm sorry, it's not.
Right.
But do keep in mind that 10 years ago, they had a $2 million a year budget in DCCED for economic development. You know how much we have last year and in the current year's budget for economic development in DCCED?
How much?
0.
Wow.
0. Our department in charge of economic development has nobody in the job of economic development. The last 2 positions got moved over to the governor's office for the development team. Those positions have been unfilled for the last year. The infrastructure office that's supposed to be helping guide our infrastructure investments as an economic development tool. Positions are empty. And I get it that some folks want us to promote resource development. Let's go unicorn hunting.
Yeah.
Because that's just about as likely to happen. And while we're ignoring the opportunities. So that's why you hear me on some of the special orders talking about some of the startups, Beaded Stream. It's a real business. They've got, 20 people employed right now. They've hired over 30 in the last 10 years at this point. They're graduates. And I mentioned before, 89% of net new job creation last is coming from startups. This is not an engine that needs to be created. It's not an engine that needs to be started. This is an engine that needs to be accelerated.
Hey, getting towards the end of our time, I wanted to thank you for sitting in on Judiciary on Friday. Mm-hmm. Whittier is in your district, and our hearing was on the legal status of American Samoans with regard to voting, spurred on by the arrest. Actually, am I allowed to say arrest? Were they arrested? It's so confusing.
We heard
the charges filed against 10 American Samoans in Whittier. And I guess I'm curious, what were your feelings about the hearing?
I'm really thankful that you organized the hearing. We needed to be able to start putting this on the record. Obviously, with the pending whatevers are going on with these 10 people, there's a lot that couldn't be talked about, apparently. But I think as we began looking into this, we realized there's a couple different issues that are going on in terms of both the legal recognition of American Samoans as citizens, and what does that mean? But also there's some administrative steps that we have in our state's voter registration, PFD and DMV processes that are meant to be helpful, but in this case seem to be inadvertently tripping up some folks that I'm not sure are meant to be caught up in this whole thing.
There were a couple of moments of the hearing that I thought were especially powerful. And I'm going to actually put in a clip right here of the executive director of the Pacific Community of Alaska talking about asking for help from the Anchorage election office in 2021 about whether or not American Samoans could vote, and being told they didn't know. The elections office didn't know in 2021.
Here's Tafili Sanoa Toliafoa speaking at the judiciary hearing on May 9th, 2025.
When we were first established as a nonprofit in 2021, we reached out to the office, the election office in Anchorage, for some explanation. People were saying, oh, we can vote legally here in Alaska for the state elections, not the federal, blah, blah, blah. There's so much confusion within the American Samoan community. So what we did is we reached out to the election office in Anchorage. And they said, we're not sure. Let's get you to go to Finumiai's office when Director Finumiai was in office. And so we then contacted the state office, and they also didn't know. And they said, let's see, we can refer you back to the office in Anchorage. And we said, okay, we're coming to the state, and the state don't even know. So in 2021, we didn't offer like a statement out to our community saying, hey, you all can vote, or no, you cannot vote. All we were saying is, okay, right now, if you have registrations to vote and you're from American Samoa, I don't know what the answer is to you. But for those of you who are from these islands, blah, 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 if you hold this immigration status, you cannot vote. However, we're still trying to look for an answer for American Samoa. It wasn't until last year that we finally was able to get a letter from Dr. Beecher that actually we were able to translate and share with our community so that they're aware that American Samoa U.S. nationals are not able to vote in the state of Alaska.
Yeah, and then from that, they then explained that in 2022, they added the checkbox on
For
there.
American national. Yeah. But not everybody knows what no one actually, who knows what an American national is?
I think we began touching on some important issues. I will say that over and over again, I've been warned that this is a complicated issue. The relationship with the American Samoan people in the community is not without its complexities.
100%. 100%. But I want to say, I'm really grateful that you were there, because I, as the chair, felt like I really had to steer away from the current case because I'd been asked to. So I was so grateful that you were there to ask more pointed questions that led to, I think, some interesting discussion. And I'm going to put a little clip in right here of that.
You'll first hear our guest, Representative Ky Holland, followed by Deputy Attorney General John Skidmore. I am playing his answer in its entirety. It's quite a long clip, but I think it's worth it. And then you'll hear me follow up, and you'll finally hear John Skidmore respond to my follow-up.
Then last fall, there's a raid in Whittier that involves 20 state troopers. But we heard from you a moment ago that there's a fairly high bar that may be there in terms of trying to understand intent before there's some effort to prosecute. And it sounded like that there might only, I believe your words were something related to a few troopers that might be involved in this. And yet we have 20 troopers sent to Whittier. I'm curious what light you can shed on what information they were acting on for this trip down to Whittier, and perhaps who ordered this effort that sounds like there was a fairly significant level of force and an effort required to investigate this situation. The dots to me, I wonder if you can help me understand how we got to this point in September.
Through the chair to Representative Holland, I'm going to do my best to answer your questions. This is a delicate area because when you talk about specific cases that are filed or the investigation that occurred in it, it would be inappropriate, unethical for me to talk about facts that aren't actually in the public record already. Just to explain so everybody understands, every defendant in a criminal case has several constitutional rights. They have the right to have counsel present. They have the right to confront their accusers. They have the right to ask questions on cross-examination. They have the right to a fair and impartial jury. And they certainly have the right to be present during all of those processes. If I were to delve into the facts of the cases in this setting, none of those things are protected here. And in fact, it would be unethical for me to try and go into factual details about those cases. That would be the sort of thing that would potentially cause me to lose my bar license because it would be inappropriate and it would violate their constitutional rights. So I want to be careful that I don't do that. At the same time, I have heard the term raid used, and I'm not sure that is borne out by the facts of what actually occurred. I can point to the charging documents that exist in these cases. I can point to other details. For instance, we heard arrests that were made. Actually, nobody was arrested. Summons were issued for all 10 defendants in these cases. There was no arrest warrants. Nobody was placed into handcuffs. A summons, which asks you to come to court for an arraignment. When I talk about a few number of troopers, I do mean a few number of troopers. I don't know the precise number that went to Whittier, but the charging documents all indicate that what they did was ask people some questions. That was all. And then they left. If someone characterizes that as a raid, maybe that's the way they think of a raid. I don't think of a raid in that terms because when I think of a raid, I think of law enforcement going in under a search warrant with guns drawn and using using real force. If you're simply knocking on the door and asking somebody questions, that's not the sort of force that I think law enforcement would consider to be the more stringent, or like I said, I don't want to go too far into the facts, but I think there's some difference in the way in which I would characterize it. Connecting the dots here, what I would tell you is what I iterated before. I can tell you what's in the charging document. The charging document describes a complaint from a citizen that believed there were a number of folks in Whittier that were voting that were not eligible to vote. And so the charging document lays out the process in which the state trooper got a list of all registered voters and then started to go through that list of registered voters to try to determine which ones had indications that they were born outside of the United States or individuals that might not be residents, and tried to work through that process to find who might qualify. I can tell you that the charging document indicates that there was 388 registered voters. There were 10 charges filed. That's it. So I apologize that I cannot go into more detail. I understand the interest in understanding how the investigation unfolded. I believe that is of significant public concern, and I want the public to hear those details. But this is not the forum in which that can be relayed. That, unfortunately, would have to be the trial or a sentencing hearing, at which time we could talk about those things.
I have a follow-up.
I was going to ask the question in a different way.
Sure.
If someone just needed to go to 10 doors in the same building and deliver a summons where there would be absolutely no requirement for any sort of force, and there's no arrests being made, we're simply asking people to come forward and ask questions, do we need to send 20 trooper cars?
So to be clear, Chair Gray, the time at which the Alaska State Troopers went was not the time in which summons were being issued. That was part of the investigation where they were simply asking questions. And I can tell you that there was more than 10 individuals they had to talk to. A few moments ago, I told you we only filed 10 charges. That does not mean there were only 10 people with whom they spoke. The resources that are necessary in order to contact however many people they may have needed to contact, those are determinations that the troopers would have made.
Like I mentioned before, I wasn't sure just how much latitude I had being a non-member, being able to ask those questions. I think in my mind, there's still a key worry that we took some folks that were perhaps alleged to have committed some voter registration crime, but I just have to worry about, is this something where there was really an egregious problem, or is this motivated by simply trying to put a data point on somebody's effort to try and justify that there's election integrity problem? Because from my standpoint, this election integrity concern that's a national issue has been largely a false narrative to create distrust in a system that actually works really well. And it just seems to me that this situation up here just doesn't feel right, that this is something where somebody found, aha, we can show that there's an election integrity problem. We're going to go take this to the hilt, put people away for 10 years for doing this. This just does not,
crazy.
It just does not feel right. It bothers me. It worries me that we have used our public safety resources in this way to try and accomplish some sort of goal of undermining our trust in our election system. And I really am grateful that you had the hearing that will continue working on this, because I think as quickly as possible, we need to debunk that there's some sort of nefarious election fraud. There's no election fraud here. There are some election registration processes that really weren't very friendly for some folks that were in a very nebulous situation. But there's nothing that anybody should be taking away from these charges, whatever they are, and whatever threat of how serious they might appear to be because of the length of sentences that they could get. That should not be equated to some sort of characterization of how good our election processes are and how well they're run.
100%.
Yeah.
Hey, do you have a book you'd like to recommend?
Yes. I always end up recommending the last book I read because I can never remember all the titles. But the book that has probably had the biggest impact on my thinking for a while is Transformative Scenario Planning by Adam Kahane. And it's a remarkable book. Adam Kahane is somebody who was involved early on in scenario planning for Shell, but then he went on and got asked by the folks in South Africa during apartheid to help them start unraveling the challenges they were having in terms of what would their future be. And he adapted these processes of scenario planning into helping people become clear on the questions that matter most to the community. And it created a pathway for people to think about how to frame the times that they're in and the constraints that they feel like they're under, and to be able to see those in a way that they could respectfully hold on to multiple different views of what the future could be, without having to decide at that point that somebody's future is right and somebody's future is wrong. And it created the capacity for people to be able to talk and develop relationships with each other, and to develop a pathway towards making decisions in the future that were better for the community. And I've seen that tool through the lens of this book and the examples there. But then I've been applying, and I've been doing scenario planning now for about 3 years in the community, as part of that Alaska version 3 stuff. And then I've also seen it done here in Southeast Alaska. Adam Kahane's company, Rios Partners, just accidentally, it was really a weird serendipity of Paul Hockenmuller being connected with them. They did a scenario planning process down here, and it's a fascinating look at the scenarios for the future of Southeast Alaska. At any rate, I think we're at a point in time in our state where we have to be having a conversation about what kind of future do we want to build in the future? What are we willing to invest in? I think that book is a way for us to be thinking about how do we work together differently about creating an understanding of the landscape in the future, so that we're not having
called again?
Transformative Scenario Planning.
Transformative Scenario Planning.
By Adam Kahane.
Ky Holland, thank you so much for being on the show today.
Thank you. It's been a pleasure.
Thank you, listeners. If you like what you heard, please subscribe, rate, and review us. To contact me, email rep.andrew.gray@akmleg.gov or call 907-465-4940.